So we still have like an hour and a half to cover the actual death by PowerPoint. So, but you guys got an hour and a half of theory and an hour and a half of actual treatment. I hope that was something useful. And hopefully it'll help give some substance to some of this information too. We only have 2 more classes of this just raw data. And then it's, from that point on, it's literally all practical and literally all interesting in theory and treatment oriented, okay? So it's limited, I promise. But these are the ones we're covering today. Downers, muscle relaxers, opiates, opioids, sedative hypnotics, alcohol, and histamines, over-the-counter downers. Probably gonna skip alcohol a little bit just because I think we're supposed to cover it next week, kind of give it its own section. And again, we'll do the same thing next week where I'll give a section on more treatment so that we break up the monotony, because I'm feeling how heavy this class is. And you guys probably are too. It's just too much to have one topic, you know. The downers are typically central nervous system suppression through blocking receptor sites. And remember the differences between stimulants, we're pushing endorphins. This one, we're suppressing receptor sites. Physical and emotional pain are usually similar variables in the brain. So you think of that in terms of like norepinephrine is one of those things where it plays an interesting role in pain, but it also works on emotions. So that emotional pain and physical pain can kind of share some circuitry to a degree. Does that make sense? There is some shared processor space. And that's important to remember because you might see people using downers for emotional pain. Yeah, maybe. That could happen. So central nervous system suppression calms the cingulate, which calms anxiety and trauma and PTSD and much more. And if we were to go and look at some of those like SPECT scans, the reason why I like looking at those SPECT scans is because it's so visceral and so simple. Some of the neurological images that I show you are just too complex to be very useful. SPECTs are just, they're painfully simple, which is a compliment and a criticism. Painfully simple. Yeah. So anyway, so they have a much longer half-life than stimulants. So we have something to compare this data to. Stimulants always flush out of your system faster. You know, the downers, they flush out of your system slower, much slower. And if you're working in addictions, you'll find this to be the case when you just hear kids talk or teenagers talk or clients talk about their UAs because one type of addict has an advantage on another when it comes to trying to get, you know, clean urine. Downers are not doing them any favors. So anyways. Dependency usually sets in varying amounts, but usually 2 weeks of daily use can trigger dependency. Tissue dependency occurs in less time with each relapse, which is fascinating. This is one of those things where as NDs, I wonder if you guys could speak more to this, like how the cells in your body can get more dependent faster with each interval is fascinating to me. I'm sure there's some really interesting science behind that. But yeah. And tolerance with downers specifically can bridge across other downers. So that's interesting, isn't it? That if I get really dependent on like a benzodiazepine, I can also be getting really dependent, or I can get really, sorry, if I get really tolerant to a benzodiazepine, I can be becoming really dependent to another downer in a different, seemingly different class. And that's just kind of a feature of downers, cross dependency. Or sorry, I keep saying dependency, cross tolerance. Sorry, what? Tentatively, I didn't want to say specifically because it says can bridge, and it didn't say which ones bridge and which ones don't, and so I don't want to say.
I think it did say benzos cross-reactive.
Okay.
Those cross-tolerant benzo and alcohol.
Okay.
And then within different classes.
That would make a lot of sense.
I think those two are really good.
It would make sense that alcohol and benzos would have cross tolerance, and the reason why is because both benzos and alcohol both cause the brain to have rapid, massive growth of GABA receptor sites. This is just, so basically the brain builds, you know, the synaptic connection for receiving the drug, which it thinks is a neurotransmitter. It's fooled into thinking it's a neurotransmitter. And so it builds a whole bunch of receptor sites for it. And we're not talking about like doubling. We're talking about like 100 times more than it needs. Like just tons. Just fills the brain up full of them. And then, again, the scary reality is the receptor sites that need to be hit to calm the brain down can't possibly be hit when there's so many other targets. There's so many other things to grab the natural GABA that you have in your system. And so, well, how do you get calm? How do you sleep? How do you do all these things? You basically don't do much of those things. You don't do much of calming, and you don't do much of sleeping until your brain literally kills off the majority of those receptor sites and you go back to normal. It's a very aggressive, painful, distressing process. And I found very few things that take the edge off of these clients. It's very painful to watch. It's very painful to be a part of it. So I can only handle 1 or 2 of those clients at a time because it stresses me out. So yeah, I'll leave it there. So anyways, yeah, muscle relaxers. But because I was an orthopedic specialist in the military, I've done a lot of work with muscle relaxers. They're actually kind of funny because, you know, I won't list them, but you know, you have muscle relaxers that are basically just a placebo. They don't tell you that, but they basically are. And there's like a whole bunch of them that are like, you give them to people, like, you know, or like people come in with muscle spasms. You know, like they give you a muscle relaxer for a muscle spasm or something like that. Like, let me be very clear. A muscle relaxer cannot solve that. It can't. Because if you have a spasming muscle and I want to give you something to stop that, your heart is a spasming muscle. So if I were to give you something to stop a spasming muscle, see the problem? I'd have to give you something that could stop your heart. And so it's not obvious. We're obviously not going to be able to do that. That's not even on the table. So there's just so much interesting stuff about muscle relaxers that I am going to practice impulse control and not go into because that was a previous occupation of mine. But I wanted you to think about something maybe a little bit conceptually. When we want to say use a muscle relaxer, there's a part of the brain that we want to affect. Okay, like maybe like look at that yellow line at 3, the sensory motor cortex. Okay, so maybe an area of effect for a drug would be, for maybe a therapeutic effect, would be adding a downer, for lack of a descriptive mechanism, to area 3, that yellow strip. The problem is that when we take a pill, an oral pill, or an injection or anything like that, the area of effect on the brain isn't just the sensory motor strip. The area of effect on the brain is wherever blood goes. So if our desired effect is the sensory motor strip, maybe even not just the sensory motor strip, but maybe just a part of it in reality, any significant effect by the drug at other receptor sites elsewhere is what you might conceptually define as side effect inducing. Like that's kind of how we get side effects, you know, is it's not the area that we really wanted to affect balance in. And that's the kind of interesting thing about oral medication. It's like, this is my area of effect. It's always all here, right? And our problem can be incredibly specific. Like I have, like not me specifically, let's say OCD. It's my left anterior cingulate gyrus. We know exactly where it is. Okay, so I take an SSRI to affect this small spot in my brain right here. You know, it's like, whoa, and we know what we want to affect, but the only thing we can do is hit the entire organ. That's all we can do. Not just the whole organ, but the entire body. And that's why it's really interesting to look at treatment modalities like neurofeedback. It's like, how do we get selective here? You know, would there'd be high value to be able to affect one system? You know, probably. So just some thoughts to get you thinking about that. Yeah, so downers are pretty common. You know, we wouldn't say that they've been used as early or as common in history as stimulants, but the poppy opium seed was used as early as 4,000. Well, actually, it was used as far east as 4,000 BCE in Switzerland. So it's made it back to, like, you know, some of the more Western European or Middle European countries, you know, 6,000 years ago. So it's not exactly like a new drug to some of these areas. But where it was probably at its like really common use was like around 3,400 BCE around the Middle East. And we didn't really see any issues from it. Like, it wasn't really something you would think of as a typical addiction. And the reason why is because it's bitter and it was unpalatable. And can you think of anything else like that? You know, there's a lot of things about like natural drugs that when we didn't use some sort of technological revolution process to boil them down into something that we could then inject or you know, just refine them down into something, you know, or grow them into something that was 15 or 30 times more potent. You know, until we had all these different technological revolutions to make it something other than what it was in the wild, it really didn't pose a huge variable in our central nervous systems. It was like, you know, technically you could get pain relief if you needed it bad enough. You wouldn't mind that it was bitter. Probably weren't going to get addicted to it. Probably weren't. Why? Because it was basically this pitch sap that tasted terrible. You know, that's basically what it was. And then it wasn't until about 500 BCE that they started getting creative with some of those, you know, downers to refine them into something a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more potent. And since 500 BCE, it ramped up aggressively very fast. So, ooh, this one, methadone. What do you guys know about methadone? Anybody have any not personal experience, but anybody have any knowledge or experience around methadone? It's a complicated one.
Well, people are put on it to get off heroin
Yep.
and other opiates.
Yeah.
And it's taken orally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I personally am pretty skeptical of it. Yeah. People are like addicted to methadone, you know, maybe for their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that kicking methadone is much harder than kicking heroin. Yeah. So people don't want to get off it because they just like they don't want, more than they don't want to get off heroin, they don't want to get off methadone because it's so uncomfortable.
Bravo. So, well said.
So, I don't know. So I feel like I don't know, I don't think it's the best method of getting people off.
I'll make a pro argument and a con argument, but I think that you made the argument I wasn't expecting that I appreciate a lot. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, they just started using it at the rehab that the shift is at, and they didn't use it before, and I guess it's like really triggering for people who are not using it because people are like nodding out and like high on it.
Yeah, it's a complicated drug. Yeah. It's a real complicated drug. So I told you that I have a lot of family that's worked in mental health for a long time. My father is not a counselor, but he was the vice president of a large treatment facility in the area, one of the largest ones, which I won't name because it's being recorded. But he was the vice president. And I had a lot of like insight into methadone research, like some of the internal research, and got to see what the numbers looked like, got to see how that kind of played out. And I think a lot of your skepticism, while I will go on the pro side and I will argue for why it should exist, you couldn't have said it better. It's deeply concerning in that it doesn't look like it's less addictive. It looks like it might, if you are willing to look at it from a different angle, it starts to look way more addictive. And it starts to look way more difficult to get off. It has a smaller acute withdrawal. The post-acute withdrawal is enormous. I mean, absolutely enormous. And And so you can almost ask the question like, why then? Why then? And the answer to that, there's two perspectives, and one of them is really good, and the other one's really disturbing, because there might be a bad answer to that, and there might be a really disturbing answer. You know, I left my book at home on accident, so I don't actually have this figure 4.1 at page 4.4. I might have to look over somebody's shoulder to remind myself what it says. 4.4. So it'll be before, yeah. It's this crazy book. I can't believe this book. I know. This numbering system makes no sense to me whatsoever. Mind if I see it?
Overdoses.
Okay.
That's the one. Oh. I think my slides are out of order. Yeah, I think my slides are out of order. So I'm wondering if, okay, I think so hold that thought. I think I want to stop and talk about methadone because that's about to go into something else. Yeah, but that should bother us. But I'll first talk about methadone for a little bit. Methadone has a very, very long post-acute withdrawal syndrome, like to the tune of maybe a year or more. Okay, that is a long time, like maybe even a couple of years. Benzodiazepines, in your book, it goes back and forth, I've noticed, by the way. The benzodiazepines have a very long post-acute withdrawal syndrome, like months or a year.
And how long do you have to be on methadone to have that super long post-acute? Yeah.
I know that you start accruing that dependency after 2 weeks, but I don't know. I don't really know. It's a good question. I haven't looked that close at the data. I know that they did I know that I've seen studies on a 5-year extensive outpatient program where they did methadone and intensive inpatient followed up by extensive outpatient methadone clinics. And at the end of that, with a 5-year follow-up, it was something like 5 or 6% of the population. I tried to find it for you, but I don't actually think it was published. 5 or 6% actually stayed sober. And sobriety is actually a really hard thing to qualify because is being on methadone considered sober?
Yeah.
Like, is being on morphine considered sober if your doctor prescribed it? Like, this is a complex question. We don't know how to answer this. So by the definition in the study, they said that like 5 or 6% of them remain sober. And that was actually considered good based on the definitions and the criteria. That was considered like a good study.
So
Yeah.
their definition of being sober was staying on methadone, or
I think their definition of sober was being off everything. So it was extremely low. After 5 years of work, very, 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 very few of them got off all opioids. And
Including methadone.
yes, very few, like 5% or 6%. Very low after 5 years of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars per person. Very low results. And it was still considered good. That was still like fantastic. And the reason why is because you have to decide on what your definition of sober is, because that's not clear when you're like, well, they're on an opiate still, but it's managed by a doctor. So is being on methadone sober? Is being on morphine sober? Like, it's just not obvious. You know, it's not obvious. And you have to decide that, I think, when they're doing research. That's a technical thing.
People are prescribed methadone. How long is the intended treatment?
I don't know that is actually part of the thought process.
that is I think that's the main problem, because it's like no, from what my understanding, and I have a limited understanding, but from what I've observed and read, I think, and like it seems like there is no plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like people being put on an SSRI. It's like people very rarely have a plan on when the person's going to get off.
Which that's scary for so many. We talked about that the first class. That's got scary reasons too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did that when they were created. I feel like there was, and they were intended to be used as short term.
Yeah, and probably methadone too, but I don't think, is that right? Like, I don't think there's like, oh, this person's going to be on methadone for 6 weeks or whatever it is.
I don't think that's the plan. I mean, I know a lot of people stay on it for an extreme amount of time, and I don't know that getting them off is, I think it's a goal, but I don't think that it is like.
So what makes methadone safer than I mean,
you don't have a lot of the externalities that you have with heroin and other things like morphine. So they're more conscious, they're less inebriated, they're less high, you know, so they're a little more functional. Does absolutely, like, it will provide the high if they take them with benzos.
Is methadone Suboxone?
Well, that's a good question.
They
I
go
don't.
over different proceeds in there, 'cause I always like get them all mixed up.
Yeah, me too. There's so many
Yeah.
brand names and trade names and generic names. Yeah. You
And
guys
then
can
there's,
Google
like,
that.
the combo one that has like two.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
we were talking about like the Percocet, and we had to get into that too, because there's another really complicated thing about the Percocet and the oxycodone, because they added one that got them in trouble because it had way too much Tylenol in it, and it actually looked like they had a nefarious goal. Like why so much Tylenol? What are you trying to do? Anyways, we'll get to that. I mean, we may not get to that because that one's a little sketchy. But one thing that you might consider with methadone is, what is the intended purpose of the methadone? Is the intended purpose? We'll give two theories. Harm reduction for who? And now you can answer it both ways and come to a perfectly reasonable like closure on the topic. But you could answer that question two ways. For who? Because you asked the right question. Harm reduction. But for who? Because you can answer that two ways. What do you think?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess society.
Yeah, economic stop loss program. Would it work? It does. The research shows that it works. It's an economic stop loss. It works as an economic stop loss program. They're not robbing convenience stores. Police aren't making police reports. People aren't going to jail. There's 100 externalities that are not happening. The cost of providing methadone versus constantly having to clean up robberies and burglaries and drugs and needles and 100 other things. It's like a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the cost of if they weren't getting it. So economic stop loss program, definitely something that's happening. The question is whether that's the motive or if the harm reduction is for the patient. And you can look at the harm reduction for the patient, and there isn't no rationalization for that perspective. They can function better than when they were on heroin. They can get a job. They can go to school. One of my students in one of my last classes before I was at NUNM, I was a clinical supervisor at another college, and one of my students was on methadone. So she was getting a counseling degree.
Could you tell?
What's that?
Could you tell?
No, you couldn't tell. No, she was very functional. Methadone's got far less externalities than heroin. They're far more functional people. They're less chaotic. They don't have to deal with the withdrawals. They can keep a job. They can go to school. They can learn some therapeutic skills. They're not crashed out. It just has less externalities. So it reduces the chaos in their life. They can think straight and think about their problems. The problem is that the externalities with methadone are on the back end, not the front end. The back end is when you're trying to get off of it. The externalities on getting off of methadone are so aggressive that people who get kicked out of methadone programs because they time out will actually go back to heroin sometimes just to get back on methadone. And that we know that because they tell us when they go to treatment. Yeah, I went back to going heroin just so I can get back in this methadone program. So I mean, there's some clinics and some states that are rearranging their thinking on this. Like, is it really a good idea to have people time out of these programs, especially if it works like an economic stop loss program? It saves the state a lot in resources. And I'm not saying that their motives are nefarious, but it's like we have to be mindful and careful about what's driving and motivating us. And we got to watch some of those systems really carefully, because someone who's really left-brained is going to see it as a stop-loss program only, and someone who's really right-brained is going to see it as only a treatment program for the individual. And the answer actually is that it's both, but you can't lose track of either side. Like there is, like, for example, a treatment needs to have, it obviously needs to have economic value in order to stay funded. And so you can argue for it and you can legislate for it. And I used to do that, by the way, for Rosemont. I used to do that. I met with the actual state officials to negotiate for our funds at Rosemont. It's a long story how I ended up with that job. It's a long story. I was very good at it though. I was aggressive. So, But we need left brain people to think that way. But we also, if we only have left brain people, then we end up abusive. Like we end up abusing them, which is what you could have. And what I fear might happen in some methadone clinics is that we've literally stopped caring about them and we just want them to not rob convenience stores. And we want them to not leave needles laying around.
Do you happen to know if there are any long-term, like, physical side effects of being on methadone a long time? Like, that would affect them, like, yeah.
It does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does. We know that. Yeah, it does a lot more than that, but I know it does that. So it does cause constipation. But downers in general, like, that's a really good question. What is the long-term? I wonder if I wrote it in my slides.
I could probably look it up.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious if you have it.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember if it's in my slides or not. So maybe we'll skip ahead and see if we don't cover it at the end. Remind me, and I'll write it down, and we'll cover it at the beginning next week. Like, what are the physical effects of long-term use of downers? Because I know it's not free, you know. But what happens? So, anyways, so this is actually really interesting. This happened a few days ago. NPR, pharmaceutical executive John Kapoor sentenced to 66 months in prison in opioid criminal trial, January 23rd, 2020. There was specifically kickback schemes. Oh, I want you to remembering that chart, by the way, that have you open the book too. Think about this as you're reading this. How does this happen? Drug deaths, drug sales, like hold on. Yeah. Treatment admissions per 1,000 people. So this is actually talking about what percentage of the population are going into these downers treatments, and what percentage of population death per 1,000, and how that's kind of always been going up. Why is it going up? Why isn't it static? Well, just here's the thought. We can consider this. Maybe this is only one piece of the puzzle. But this is something to consider with something that happened literally last week. There was kickback schemes. So giving kickbacks to the doctors, incentivizing them to prescribe, like bribing and incentivizing them to prescribe opioids. 1/3 of the drug rep program was run by a woman whose her only former job was stripping. And she was in charge of training the drug reps. That was one of the things I hesitated putting that one in there. I actually felt like I had to put it in quotations because that's what they called it in the article. But I think what we're supposed to assume from that is that it seemed like NPR was suggesting that they were being extremely sexually aggressive from their female reps to their doctors, the male doctors. That they were trying to manipulate the doctors into prescribing more. That it's basically this gross, seedy, kind of corporate aggressive marketing system. They're doing it all the wrong ways. They're appealing on all the wrong dimensions here, through illegal kickbacks and through sexuality. We're talking about drugs in medicine, like so far off base, guys. So $223 million in fines with 66 months in prison. Other executives got between 12 and 33 months. Bankruptcy was announced immediately after, which means that part of I assume, because I own a company, I assume that bankruptcy means that they did not, for whatever reason, the judge did not consider some of those fines to be considered criminal. And so bankruptcy meant they could escape some of them. So it means they may not have paid them, or may not have paid some of them. That's what that means, possibly. And then you have the article there. So if you want to reference it for future notice, or you want to read it yourself, you can. But I'm just thinking about, like, how does this happen? It's like, well, it might be that there isn't some constraints around some of this, like I don't know, there might be some gross culture going on here. And I was blessed to be in the military, which is a weird thing to say because I don't actually feel that, where we didn't let any reps in, and we just did what we wanted to do. And so we did treatments that maybe a naturopath would be proud of. We did a lot of infrared light therapy. We did a lot of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We did therapies that I'm extremely proud that we offered just because it was obvious that they worked. You know, I have this cool thing that I'm still really proud of that I have for either trauma work or drawing blood. It's a tourniquet that's round and you can roll it. So it was like, if you're having someone with blood loss, you would just start at the back and roll it down, and you'd push blood into their extremities, into their torso. Or you can go the other direction to get a vein. You roll it down the arm to get blood pressure up. So you use all kinds of cool stuff. But the light therapy, the infrared light therapy, hyperbarics, things that you just don't see applied in modern medicine, we didn't wait around for. We also didn't have to deal with reps, which was really, really nice. But I can't speak to that. Hopefully you guys will not have to deal with that either.
I think it's weird in general that it's like even a thing. There's drug reps who
Like,
aren't
they're like
even
lobbyists.
trained to like
Yeah.
go out and sell. Yeah, it's weird.
Somebody wants to come and wine and dine you and show you a good time and
Yeah,
buy
it's
you
weird.
tickets to a 5-star restaurant or to an amusement park, and then give you all these kickbacks if you spend time with them and buddy up to you. And then of course this particular company, 1/3 of the reps being trained by someone who it seems suggested that it was sexually, it suggested that there was a sexual nature to their training. You know, I wish I had more information about that because I don't really know how to include that other than that I basically put what it said. Kind of disturbing, you know, because people died. Like there's a graph on there for deaths, you know. So consider the concept of paired association. Neurons that fire together wire together. This is interesting because I've seen this firsthand, but discuss painkillers in the use within the practice of pain management versus other ventures, and how paired association may play a role in addiction. That might be a complicated question. I don't know if you guys picked up on what I was asking you yet. Did you get it? It's okay. Well, read it one more time and then I'll walk you through it. If I have to just tell you what we've seen in pain management, because I did a year working in the Wounded Warrior Ward and doing the life flights. So I'm talking about people who had like skin grafts on 1/3 of their bodies, okay? There's a lot that I've seen. I cannot work in trauma anymore because I've seen more than an ER doctor sees in their life. I'm done, okay? Can't do it anymore. But painkillers, let me just give you a hint. Some of them, a lot of them, come off their pain meds as their pain goes down, and they're not addicted. Okay, why? Like,
Because the emotional aspect that opiates treat for some people.
Mhm.
I don't know how to speak.
You're good. You're on their track. Mm-hmm.
That wasn't why they were using them.
Right.
They were only using them for pain.
Yeah. So if you're using it for pain and pain's here, and we put pain medicine here, and pain starts to go down and we lower the medication, the brain is actually pretty intelligent. It's like, oh, I see what's going on here, right? And so the pain level goes down, we lower the pain meds. We kind of keep these things tracked and they're kind of moving together. It's possible that the brain actually has a paired association between the pain and the drug level in your blood system, okay? Now, that doesn't always happen because you're a very, very complex system, okay? But what happens when you're not using a pain med for pain? You're using it for emotional pain. And that's the paired association. You know, it's not like emotional pain is just gonna go away and stay away. You know, it's not like that. And so I think and we had a lot of conversations about this in the military, and there was a lot of research going around. I don't know if they were actually publishing it or if it was just people running around doing research, talking about it a lot. But especially the Wounded Warrior Ward, which is like the best place in the world to study pain, because you know you got 200 guys with skin grafts to study, lots of stuff going on. Sorry, I don't mean to be morbid. I'm used to it, but but they didn't get addicted as much as you think they should. They didn't have as much withdrawal from pain meds as much as you think they should. A lot of them skipped that process, despite the fact that you think that they would have to go through those processes. It wasn't as hard as often as you think it would be. But when we have this kind of paired association with pain meds and emotions, if that happens, then you have a lot of room for triggers to say, I need the med. There's a lot of reasons why your brain would say, emotional pain, I need the med, right? That's just gonna happen all the time. That's never gonna, that paired association is going to kick you all day, especially on a bad day. It's just going to keep hammering you over and over and over again. I need the med, I need the med, I need the med. And I think like we talked about how that was similar with even stimulants and smoking. It's like I'm stressed, I need the cigarette, right? That paired association, same kind of variable, right? So I would just suggest that you think about pain meds in terms of some of the same vein, but with that paired association with emotional processing, and how they are addicted to it because it's paired to something. It's actually paired to something. It could be a tissue dependency, sure, but the trigger is something really, really specific inside of them, something limbic, something that they don't want to feel. That's why, yeah, anyways, we'll go on, we'll skip ahead. So, yeah, so, yep. You can think about that, how that variable might play in with anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, etc. And I think, is there a chronic pain graph? Can someone find 4.15? I'm sorry, I don't have my book. Yeah.
So like that.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. What do you guys think about that graph?
Yeah, I think people like don't generally or not given like the right kind of feedback to facilitate the kind of patients needed for the chronic pain to go down.
Yeah.
Because like this first part of this graph is saying like
it just goes down.
Over time, the chronic pain will go down. You might not get to zero. You probably won't get to zero, but it goes down.
Have you guys seen that in like your own lives or other people's lives around you? So I've seen a lot of chronic pain, but I also worked in mental health for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I mean, I guess it depends on the definition of chronic pain.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
that's
I guess
fair.
if someone's like has a back injury or something,
yeah,
you know, and they don't overuse drugs, then it does eventually go away.
Yeah. Last time I did a migraine assessment at a doctor's office, which was like a 3-day assessment, I needed a score of 40 on this chart to be considered disabled. My score was 440. Okay? I'm here. I have a headache right now. Okay? And this is a good day. I do a lot of things to get my migraines down. I have a lot of treatments, and it's actually informed how I got into some of the cool treatments that I'm in, like cranial electrostimulation therapy and neurofeedback and hyperbaric oxygen. And I do a lot of things like yeah, I've taken really a lot of control of my own nervous system. But like on my best day would probably still be a bad day for most people, and I'm not even going to notice because my pain threshold is really high. And there are people whose lives are much harder than mine, who somehow still figure out how to be functional. Like I have clients who, I'll just tell this story. I'm fond of this story, I don't know why. I've had clients who I was driving to work, told true story. And as I'm driving to work, there's somebody on the sidewalk just crashed out on the sidewalk, just face planted, unconscious. And so of course I pull over, I put on the what do you call it, the hazard lights. And it's like you're getting the phone out to call 911, and it's like, oh, it's my client. My client passed out from pain. She's got a pain disorder. Passed out from pain. And I know this person doesn't want me to call an ambulance. And then all these people come up and they're like, is she okay? Like, we should call an ambulance. And I know she doesn't want people to call an ambulance, but guess what I'm not allowed to do? I'm not allowed to tell them that because of HIPAA. And then, of course, I'm not allowed to tell anybody that I know her. Hilarious scenario. Because of course she wakes up, she's disoriented for a minute. Eventually she comes to and she recognizes me. And then she throws some sort of quip at me, like a joke. And then everyone realizes that she knows me. And then they're all pissed off that I didn't say I knew her, which is funny. Just on the side of the road. And then long story short, I went to my clinic, and 5 minutes later she walked in the door and we had a session. So, and it's just like these people go about their lives, they go about their lives, and they put one foot in front of the other, and they they still attend their meetings, and they develop their communities, and they have friendships, and they date, and they just go about their lives, you know. But like, just like that metronome system, like you screw with it too much, you end up dipping off into chaos, and you end up trying to control it to the point where you destroy the whole system, where you destroy the whole thing goes belly up and blows up on you. But there is something to be said about just like, you know, just riding it out a little bit. I don't think we should do nothing. Like, obviously you guys are NDs, and obviously I'm not doing nothing, you know, but I'm interested in like things that permanently stabilize my brain. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in something, I'm not interested in anything permanent that I am dependent on, that I'm going to also get eventually destabilized by. Does that make sense? Like, I have to think really critically about that. Otherwise, I'm going to destroy myself, because I'm actually kind of fragile. You know, like 440 score. You know, it's not good. It's not good. You tip off and lose a month like I did last month. You know, like, I was really worried I wasn't going to be able to teach this class. So, I mean.
Sort of unrelated to your sessions with people, that's mainly neurofeedback that you do?
Yeah, I would say about 2/3. I do a lot of counseling. I do a lot of counseling because I work with dissociative PTSD, so like severe trauma. I have to do some counseling, and obviously, like, about 1/3 of my work is counseling. Okay. Yeah, and
do you do neurofeedback with everyone?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's just some people it's not a good fit for. It's definitely a good fit for most, but sometimes they walk in the door and they just not asking for it. And sometimes I wish that they were, or sometimes we do neurofeedback on somebody and they just don't seem very sensitive to it. And there's literally specific people with specific genetic codes. I forget what they're called, but there's people with certain genes that they don't respond as quickly to it. And like, I'm actually one of those. Like, neurofeedback took a long time to work well on me. And if I didn't own the system, I would never have been able to get as many sessions as I needed to get what I'm getting out of it. It just would not have been functional. And so I'm just glad that I own it.
Do you think most people who don't respond are that way and would respond if they were able to?
I'm in theory, but only in theory. Like, I can only hypothesize. You know, I can only hypothesize. So I had something that I held on to. I was a severe insomniac, and it fixed that relatively quickly. And I had torticollis, which is a extraordinarily painful disorder.
I read about that yesterday.
Did you really?
First time ever. Yeah.
I was Quasimodo. They told me I would die from that condition.
Like,
Yeah.
where your neck gets like.
Yep.
And, like,
I looked like this for 4 years. This is what I looked like, and it straightened me out. I did 4 years of physical therapy and no progress. Yeah, and I didn't expect it to, and I'm not marketing it that way, by the way. Okay, just so we're absolutely clear, I did not expect that. I don't see research on that either, but I straightened out, and my muscle spasm stopped, and I straightened out afterwards. It really blew my mind. Like, I'm still very humbled by that, because I had given up. Like that, like 4 years of physical therapy and excruciating pain. Like, I have a bed that got motors because I can't sit up. Like, I couldn't sit up. And like, I forget what that's like. Like, it's until moments like this where I remember I lost a couple years. I don't even remember that. Sometimes I go months without thinking about that. That's crazy. Like, how can you go months without thinking about that? It's a good thing. It's good. You just move on, have a normal life now, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, sorry, we're way off track on all kinds of things. We're just rabbit trailing. So anyways, this is that discussion that we were talking about having where, you know, Oxycontin, Percodan, I wonder if I spelled that wrong, and Percocet, pain discussion. This is a really interesting article I recommend that you take a look at. I'll post this weekend. If I don't, please harass me, because you guys need this stuff, and you should be able to reference it. And I really do need to just sit down and upload all this stuff for you guys. This study basically is only one study. I believe it was a large study though, that basically suggested that whether you use pain meds or don't, the long-term results, well, it's not short-term, but long-term results are not significant. Okay? That's what it's showing. That pain meds do not help in the long term. They just don't. They don't cut it. They don't do it. So it's like basically you'd be better off if you didn't use them. That's what it's saying. So what your book was showing. And this is actually where I want you guys to just pat yourself on the back and think about like the career you've chosen. Because just like me, my migraines are down a lot. Okay, still have bad months, obviously. But I didn't do that through any traditional method. And you guys are moving into an area where you can actually answer some of these questions. If not this, then what? Diabetic nerve pain, big giant zero. There's nothing for those people, nothing, okay? What about long-term chronic back pain? You don't know this, but in a couple of years, we've already done the legislation. It's already pre-planned. I did a podcast on it. There's a specific guy who works in legislation, or he's in the process. They're cutting all opioids to chronic pain. It will not be allowed to prescribe. They're cutting all of it, okay? I can't even begin to imagine what that's going to do for addictions in the United States, okay? But you guys have to be ready, because you have to have tools for these people, because they can't give them nothing. We did that once before. 1997, I think it was. I'm going from memory, I apologize. I should have looked it up, it just came to me. Payat Clinic, which was a clinic that you won't hear about anymore because it's gone. It was a series of clinics across the Northwest, prescribed opioids at obscene levels, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times the normal dose you would give. Basically just whatever people wanted. They come with insurance, the doctors would give them whatever they wanted. And this one little chain of clinics used up, I think it was either a third or half of the national supply of opioids. National supply. It was so big that the federal regulators were like, whoa, stop. They immediately put an audit on them, an emergency audit. And of course they shut them down. People went to jail. It was a big fiasco. But one thing they did that was really, really rough. Not rough, I mean, I don't know what else they could have done, but they voided all prescriptions. Voided. And so you can predict what happens based on that small model. It's a small model. What happens was that we were known for meth in the Northwest back then. And we all of a sudden became known for opiates again. Overnight, we became known for downers again. Just because all those populations, a percentage of them immediately shifted to street drugs. So, I mean, we're gonna see something from that when that rolls out. And if any of them, well, the percentage of them that reach for something else, NDs are the only ones that have options. The doctors are gonna say physical therapy and anti-anxiety meds. That's all they're gonna do. So, but you guys have a lot more to offer, and that's extremely exciting. I mean, because they're hopeless. They'll be hopeless people. They really will. I know, because I've been through it. I've experienced it. It's terrible. So, benzodiazepines. Gosh, I feel like we've covered this a lot, have we?
Well, I had a patient today who just had a seizure 2 days ago because she wasn't able to get benzos.
Rough.
And she really wants to come off of them. She also has some military, so I'm not doing this. So she like made this really nice neurite formula, and we're not gonna start tapering her right now since that just happened, but like very, very slowly.
It's a hard process. Painful to watch, isn't it? You don't want people to have seizures, because seizures damage your brain, which make you more susceptible to seizures, which give you more seizures, which make you more susceptible to seizures. So you get the idea? Seizures are bad. Don't have seizures. So the goal is keep them below the seizure threshold and let their brain adapt. But that's hard. It's hard work. Sometimes you have to send them out to a residential treatment facility. And I mean, I'm sure your supervisor's thinking about that, but it's always worth asking, when do we send them to inpatient? It's worth asking, you know, if you realize that she's dysregulated or if she is trying to get off her meds too quickly.
Yeah,
like,
it was more a problem of
access.
yeah, something was happening with the pharmacy, wasn't it?
Okay.
The doctor was trying to get it done.
Yeah.
So then after that happened, then
Yeah, I don't deal directly with that, but I work extremely close with the doctors when I'm working with them, and so I'm on the phone with them, going like, hey, when is the line where we go inpatient? And usually when I pose that question, you'll find this even with a supervisor. If you pose that question, it'll make them insecure, and they'll start thinking about that really strongly too, because it's like, oh, they could die. Like, yeah, I don't want that. Like, you know, inpatient is where they're just never not being watched. You know, it's all regulated, and they can, you know, and it usually goes for a month or two when it comes to benzos. It's usually a month or two process. I've sent people out every once a year at least.
What sort of facility, like at least in this area, does that, like inpatient for like a month or two? Like, are there specific programs?
Yeah, there's specific programs. I think there's something called like By the Beach, I think, or something. I remember, that's not the right, Serenity. Yeah, Serenity is one, and then there's the one I just referred someone to. What is it called? Honey Lake, yeah.
And it's specifically for.
And if you want
people off meds or just any
well,
sort of
so any kind of rehab service probably. So if you want, I'll give you the name of a guy who just does placement, and he works specifically for a large chain. But if he can't find somebody within his chain, he'll find you somebody outside of the chain. And the reason why he does that isn't because he has to, it's because he's a recovering addict and he cares. And I'll give you his number if you want it. And it's just a nice resource to have, because, you know, his treatment centers range, you know, as low as, you know, 10 grand a month, or 8 grand a month, I mean, which is as low as it will possibly get, by the way. There isn't cheaper. So he basically has the whole spectrum of quality across the East Coast, across the across the United States. But again, he works for a specific chain of like 22 facilities or 30 facilities or something. But he,
so like you have to have money somehow to pay for.
Well, insurance will be covered by some of them, but it's still, after insurance, it's still very expensive, because you're going to hit your maximum deductible. It's going to happen. So, but yeah, and that's going to happen. So, and it's hard, man. There's no easy way to do, you know, the inpatient treatment thing, but people get a ton out of it. And if it's a safety issue where you don't know that they're going to survive, it just, you got to do it. You just do it, and then they make payments on it instead. Just, you know, you just make payments on it. So, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, like for example, my wife, we've had a lot of trauma around having kids. I won't go into all those details, but we only have one kid. We've been married 10 years and never been not trying to have kids. So, you know, one kid we had, because we had so many struggles with miscarriages, there was no way my wife was going to have a baby in the same hospitals where she's had miscarriages, because they just put you in the birthing ward, which is something I can't wrap my head around. Like, genuinely can't wrap my head around. They put you in both places, because then you're never going to want to go back to that place again. And you can go to therapy, and you can do EMDR, and you can get a lot of that stuff integrated and desensitized, but you're not going to prefer that. You just know you're going to prefer that. So we decided to do a home birth, and, like, you know, get the doctor to come to our house and get a midwife to come to our house, and like a whole team. And it was worth it. It's like, that's a thing where it's like, you've been paying on that for a couple of years, man. I just paid it off. My daughter's 3. Okay, she's 3. I just paid for her birth. You know, and like, you don't want those to happen like all the time, but like how you can have a crisis every 5 years, and, you know, it's like paying off a car. Just pay it off. You know, it just happens. So anyways, yeah, sorry.
And then how long what does Medicaid pay for in terms of treatment? Because Medicaid pays for residential.
So if Medicaid will cover it, I believe Medicaid covers all of it. But
Okay,
but
so
if Medicaid will cover it,
treatment for a year, they'll cover that?
Medicaid's going to have an immensely structured and rigid criteria and protocol with like, if this first, and you're gonna have a person that you know needs this, and they might die, but they haven't done this yet, and this yet, and this yet. And so that's kind of the problem with some of these more rigid systems. It's like, it's free for them, but they haven't met criteria 3 or 4 yet before they go to 5.
Yeah.
And so I think watching people go through Medicaid is anxiety provoking for me, because I'm like, they could die. And the state's like, well, you know, they've only been to the ER 3 times, you know, you know, and you're like, ah. I mean, I'm not articulating it well because I actually don't understand it. All I know is that it's very hard to get my head wrapped around that. So, I mean, you guys will know a lot more about that in a very short period of time than me. That's more your world than mine. So.
I think it was like this addiction treatment in general, like the central city for certain people, help people move through that process. If they don't have money and then they need to go to treatment, I feel like they know all the stuff, that organization.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, I feel like there's a lot to know.
Yeah.
You just have to lean on the people that already know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, you guys know the Serenity Prayer? I should have added that as a slide. Maybe we'll cover that next week. But God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. If you could break that down, which we will probably next week, it's really beautiful and complex and compact. Like we actually have to, the only thing we can do to lower our anxiety sometimes is to know that's not something in my domain. I have to let it go. And like that's like working in Rosemont. Like the only way to lower your anxiety is to know, like, yeah, that's not something I can control. Let it go, and like go home and let it go. And like truly, like if you can't let it go, it could drive you nuts, man. but working with any kinds of clinical staff or clinical clients, I think that thinking like having a safety plan for your client, sending them to the ER when you have to, trying to get them an inpatient, doing everything you can, and at the end of the day, feeling like your scope of practice, that you've done everything within your scope of practice that you can do, you actually have to leave it at work and you have to go home and you have to sleep, and it sucks, but you have to learn how to do that, because in the Serenity Prayer is like your mantra and not just theirs, it's yours too. So.
This is really random, and we don't have to talk about it now, but if I can plant a seed for sometime later, I would love to have a conversation with you about how to work in like a stressful environment or addictions and mental health, like of any kind, and to be able to actually leave stuff at work, to still have compassion while you're there, and like how, like specific strategies to try to learn how to do that.
Can I write it down and think about it, because I can give you, I know that I want to give you a comprehensive answer. Strategies for leaving stress at work.
Yes, and remaining like compassionate and present rather than getting burnt out and apathetic, which is what happened to me.
Yeah, and not just you, most people. Most people, and most people. I could try, and I'm not gonna try to answer that now. I'm gonna wait and prep on it because it's important. It's an important thing. But I did a lot of the staff training at Rosemont, and when I got there, the average length of stay for the staff was 2 months. Okay, it was so bad that on my 4th week of work, I was PIC by seniority.
I was
5 months. It's kind of screwed.
PIC, person in charge.
So get this: out of 8 to 10 people who were working there that day, on my 4th week, I had been there the longest.
Wow. I thought mine was bad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. When I left Rosemont, because I know. I kind of want to. They're so morbid though. Like I feel like it's like breaking some sort of rule to like describe my first day. Like if I just describe you my first 10 minutes, I feel like I could get in trouble from the dean. I mean, I kid you not, because you can't repeat like that gruesome, brutal insult. It's like so graphic, like almost like, wow, that was so creative and morbid. Like I can't, it's burned into my brain. I can't get rid of it. Anyway, so I get distracted. So I'll think about that. But by the time I left, by the way, just about everybody who had been there, the average length of stay was about 2.5 years. So we did a good job with retention by teaching like some mental fortitude and mental boundaries. Yeah. So yeah, but it was crazy how I was like a senior staff after a month, which was just obscene. Yeah, not good. Go ahead.
Oh my God.
The reason why you're not wrong is because those treatment facilities don't exist anymore. The legislation obliterated them all. It's like basically working in a psych ward. It was one of the last psych wards in existence, and now there are none. Now there's just 0. Rosemont is now SAGE, which is a shorter treatment, like 3 months. And they actually want me to go start a neurofeedback practice with them. And we're talking about actually doing that, like an actual neurofeedback services for SAGE. So I think that'd be really poetic to go back where my mental health work started and just bring like 15 years of experience. It's really funny because the director was talking to me and she was like, you have to come and see our seclusion rooms and our timeout rooms. I'm sitting here like, how long have you worked there? She's like, 1.5 years. I'm like, I worked there for 4 years. You don't need to show me around. Like, I worked there longer than you. She had no idea that I had been former staff, you know? Anyways, yeah, we could talk about it forever. It's very bonding, crazy experience, very, very intense. Oh, methadone, yep. So this is back here. We kind of covered this already. Long Kustakia withdrawal syndrome, that's the most important thing to remember. Very disruptive, dull ache. Think of it not an acute attack, but a dull, a dull, maddening ache. That's what post-acute withdrawal does with methadone. And it goes for years. And it still has street demand. That's the problem. It has to be really heavily supervised because it still has street demand. And if they mix it with benzos, they still get high from it. So they like to mix it with benzos. Yep. So you mix it with alcohol, it can kill you, by the way. And people still do, but it can kill you in 1 drink. You can take methadone and have 1 drink of alcohol and it can kill you. People still do it, but it could kill you.
So is that not supposed to make you high?
Relative to traditional opiates, not as much, no.
Okay.
I mean, technically you're still high, but you're a lot more functional. It's just kind of a spectrum, maybe.
Okay, and is it maybe more when you first started, like people feel more high?
I can't speak to that. It's a fair question, though. Yeah. I don't, I never worked in a methadone clinic, otherwise I might know, but I haven't yet. So some research on methadone, significant reduction in personal economic chaos. So there's a stop loss, and then, there's some interesting maybe qualitative studies here on hard to gauge sobriety. And this resource, this PDF, the second one, is just a huge document that seemed extremely comprehensive on methadone. And if you ever want to reference or learn about methadone, I mean, that citation would give you a ton of meat for a study. I mean, I've done your work for you. So we kind of talked about this. I kind of want to skip ahead because we don't have a whole ton of time. Relapse discussion on downers. What isn't it? I'm trying to remember why I wrote this slide. Walk through what an addict might be thinking and rationalizing through a relapse. I don't know. I guess we can talk about this. I don't really recall maybe what I was getting at when I was writing it, but usually have like a really. But I think I was trying to get at the cognitive distortions that people get themselves tied up into, and some of the perceptual manipulations that they pull on themselves. It's a perceptual manipulation game. That it's I need it, it's medicine, or it's not actually bad for me, or the dry drunk model. Do you know what dry drunk means? So dry drunk is just kind of a coy term that refers to someone who is more functional when they're relapsed. So and this is actually really common because people use drugs to balance out dysregulated nervous systems. It's not a good long-term plan. It'll destroy you eventually, but when I'm drinking, I'm nicer than when I'm sober. Or when I'm high, I'm more productive or nicer than when I'm sober. And that's partially because of what they're medicating against: trauma, psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar. And then when they're sober, they just don't like themselves. And so you can imagine how when they're face to face with their real self that they haven't spent any time developing coping skills for, it's really hard. Like it's getting to know that person is disturbing and distressing. I mean, it's the version of them that they can build up without killing themselves. But they'd rather, or rationalize if they can just store their thinking under just a few variables, they can go back to the drug and be somebody better. Sometimes that's a large part of it sometimes. So dry drunk, you'll hear that a lot. It's a good term to remember. Yep. So I was wondering if you guys had a lot of study already into things like Narcan or Hep C, Hep A, HIV, or different infections, different points in your studies already. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They I believe they cured Hep C, didn't they?
Yeah, there's a treatment now.
It's fantastic.
A lot of people at the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're really excited.
That's so exciting. I remember hearing about the cure, and it was just like, there was like literally one client in my mind that I just like got a little emotional about. It's like, this is a little girl who was like 13 who had it. It was like, oh good, like, you know, I just needed, that was good, you know. I mean, she's in jail for like 20 years, but no, she's not suffering from Hep C anymore, and that's important to me. Sweet kid.
Yeah.
I don't know much about Hep A. I know there's a vaccine for it, so people don't get it as often. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Well, Hep B, there's a vaccine.
Hep B? I'm thinking B. Okay, that's probably why I didn't put it on there.
They always concerned about like certain.
I don't hear as much about Hep
Hep A when
A.
traveling, so I think maybe it's like.
Interesting. I don't know. Yeah. HIV is a complex one too. Mm-hmm. Narcan. Do you guys know what Narcan is?
That's the
Naloxone? Is it naloxone?
Naloxone? I don't know if I know
that's the
naloxone.
overdose one.
Mhm.
When people overdose.
I've never had to use it, but I've known a lot of people. A lot of my friends have used it. Yes. Do you know how it does that? It's fascinating. Yeah. So do you know? Because I have a lot of. I used to be an REMT, and you know, long story short, I have a lot of friends who are paramedics, and so it's just a strange experience. You have this person you're losing them. You know, their respiratory failure. You can't get them to breathe. Their heart's doing some funny stuff, and you hit them with Narcan, and just like a few seconds later, bam, wide awake. And it's not just like they're sober. It's like they have nothing, there's no opioid stimulation at all. So they're in withdrawal, like right now. And they are pissed. So they're usually swinging. They go from dying to punching you. I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories from friends.
Yeah, it only lasts.
Doesn't last forever, so it metabolizes out really quickly.
Right.
Ooh.
So if the drug is still in your body,
it's gonna win. So the enzymes work the Narcan out of your system a lot faster than the opioid. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yep, it is a very interesting one. There's lots of things we could discuss about that, but we're not. So anyways, I whipped through those slides because I thought we had a lot more, but there we go, general discussion. So so yeah, opioids are kind of an interesting one. Any general questions about opioids or treatment?
Like differentiate between all the ones.
Yeah, do you want to go? We can go back to like one of the first slides where there's a list of them, and so that we have them to reference. So, you know, actually, we didn't really cover sedative hypnotics that well, did we?
I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about
between like say like
epinephrine and hydromorphone.
There's a table on 4.6.
I might have to peek at that because I don't have my book. Oh yeah. Synthetic opioids, yeah.
But I'm trying to get a better understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are talking to somebody who is not a prescriber. And so I'm only able to speak a little bit into some of those specifics. And what little I can speak on, I'm probably going to increase controversial discussions rather than speak too much. Yeah, what is that? What's that look?
If we have time.
Go, we do. We do. I mean, I want to make sure that I answer her question though, but I'm curious what that look meant. Yes, yes, I do know a little about that, kratom, yeah. So remember that thought, because kratom does deserve to be covered, mostly because it's very, very popular in Portland. And you need to know about it. I can talk a lot about kratom. I can. And I can talk about the pros and the cons. And you're not going to hear a lot of cons, but I'll give you some to think about, okay? Yeah, we'll finish her question a little bit. So for example, when you're looking at the non-synthetic opioids, specifically, you're going to see basically, I can't speak to the molecular differences in the opioids specifically, but I can speak to the level of mixing of other drugs. And the pet drug that they like to mix is typically Tylenol. And as I said, when I talk about these things, what little I know, what little I can add to this discussion, it's not at your level, okay? I'm below you guys when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't have this authority. But I would propose that there's always been a little bit of skepticism by regulators on why Tylenol and why that much Tylenol. And there was a point where the regulators slapped a whole bunch of fines and revoked, wouldn't let them put a med on the market because it had disproportionate amount of Tylenol and very, very little opioids. That the intent there was some suspicion that the intent was
Toxicity?
Yeah, maybe. So the idea being that if you release a drug on the market, that you can't really extract the Tylenol chemically from the opioid. And so how much Percocet are you willing to take before it hurts your liver? Does that make sense?
So it would be like safe in that it would protect against addiction?
Well, that's what the regulators were worried about is this mechanism here to consequence or prevent addiction? And if it's consequence, that's bad. If it's prevention, we have to ask, is it working? And if you put a drug on the market that is a high amount of Tylenol and a lower amount of opioid, and there's a certain percent of addicts that will ignore that, and the reality is most of them or all of them will, how many of them will it kill? And that was the problem. This was about 10, maybe 12 years ago. And I tried very hard to find the name of that drug that got smacked down, but it got smacked down so hard and so fast, I can't find any articles on it, but I know it happened. I can almost remember the name of it on the tip of my tongue. But that's that question of like, we got to watch it really closely because the intent mattered. And even if the intent didn't matter, we should ask, does it work? Because I don't think it does. I've worked with addicts. I don't think they care. This will destroy your liver. Okay, whoop, they don't care. Okay, so if you release that, it hits the street and it's much, much higher Tylenol than the others. And they think, oh, it's got opiates. They don't care. So then oxycodone is a higher dose of opioids, lower dose of Tylenol. Percocet, lower dose of opioids, higher dose of Tylenol. Okay, makes sense? I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I think Vicodin is acetaminophen and hydrocodone.
Mm-hmm. Acetaminophen and hydrocodone, yes. I can't speak to the varying differences between the different opioids themselves. That's something that you will have to learn in a specific class for that. So I'm not teaching pharmacology because you should learn that probably from an ND. They let me teach pharmacology in like counseling programs because I'm not going to teach them anything I can't because your scope is way bigger. Like you should learn from somebody who can teach you the good stuff, you know. So I don't, Mona, do we answer your question adequately? Because I know I have limitations on what I can answer that question in. because I know there's a lot of different kinds, but that's kind of outside my scope. I wish I could do more, other than to speak of maybe med mixing, or what they do is med mixing, I suppose. Any other? So you wanted to ask about kratom, and if you want to come back to that, Manel, you can. Okay. Because I honestly I don't know how to answer it more. It might just be outside of my scope. Sorry. And even if I go home and study, it's not going to be coming inside my scope, really. But kratom is a GABA agonist, much like a benzo, but a lot slower. And a lot of people who start using kratom were using it at like kind of a lower, less pure dose. And so it just flew under the eye of the regulators, where it just seemed this thing that kind of took the edge off a little bit. Kind of like maybe someone who was using marijuana before they started growing it in a certain way. I don't know if you guys know this, but the way that we grow marijuana causes it to have 15 to 30 times more THC than it does naturally in the wild, just by how you grow it. There's a growing method. I can't claim to understand that, but I know they do it. But with kratom, it wasn't a big enough GABA agonist to make a huge difference. And part of it was, I think people were swallowing it, and it was going in their digestive system, and they was digesting most of it, and they were destroying most of it before they got into their system. And then people started finding ways to process it down into like a pulp, and then put it under their tongue or in their gums. And so they're just taking the same substance, and they're finding ways of getting it into their bloodstream without it being destroyed in their digestive system. And maybe only in the last couple of years, people have been refining those methods very much like not in a large corporate way, okay, but very much like just people are doing this, have figured out, how to get the effect high enough to have a psychoactive effect. And only maybe in the last year have they realized, oh crap, people are getting withdrawal symptoms from this. And that's new information, brand new information. People did not think that kratom could be used in such a way that could cause dependency or could cause that kind of GABA receptor growth that you see in benzos and alcohol. And it does seem like it does. It doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because you still have benzodiazepines, right? But that's outside of my scope. I think that's something for you to discuss with your supervisors. It just like, there should be some wisdom around that. Like there was a time when the opium plant, the poppy plant, was just this bitter thing that didn't matter that much, right? And then someday it's heroin, right? And so we're watching that kind of take place in just the last almost year or 2 or 3 years with kratom, where it's like, this was like a nothing. And now it's something, it's actually something real. It's something potent. It can be something actually potent. And they didn't know that. It's figured it out like in the last few months.
I have to say something about that. Like, I don't think it's nothing like in its raw form.
Sure.
Several years ago, I drank it as a tea. And it works on opiate receptors too. And I felt
you're right.
like I'd taken an opiate and got the same moment, like
really?
Opiate. And then my blood pressure like went down a lot, and then I had to like lay on the floor for like half an hour until
Whoa.
So it's really strong.
Well, I've never tried it.
Undersensitive, I can't take painkillers.
Wow.
Like those opiate painkillers, and I'm just always really sick from them. But like it acted very similarly to an opiate.
Wow.
And I don't think
does it speak to that in the book, by the way? I don't remember I did read it, but I don't recall.
Well, it just says that like.
Mm-hmm. I'm remembering the GABA because I was reading the newest research that came out a few months ago on it. Yeah. But a lot of times it works on multiple receptor sites. And so I'm glad you mentioned
25 alcohol is like found in there, so probably works on all kinds of different receptors. And then there's induced opiate like so it does something with it acts on the opiate and kappa receptor.
Okay. So there's newer information in this book that says it's also working on GABA receptors. So it's both. It is definitely both. Because I'm going off the research I read like 2 months ago.
Yeah, they're probably isolating on parts of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I'm really glad that you brought that personal experience because because I've only seen anecdotal experiences from my clients that have come in who have had chronic pain that are telling me what they've tried from their intakes. And I'm actually really value like, oh, there can be that kind of response. I need to remember that. You need to know that.
Yeah, my experience was really strong, so I like, you know, I wouldn't use it lightly.
Yeah.
And what sort of forms, like, do you actually buy it in?
It's like a powder. I think it's like a dried herb powder. Like that's how I had it. And I think that's how they sell it a lot. But maybe they're doing some more.
I've heard of clients say they had pills and they're like, I take 8 pills or I take 4 pills. And I've heard of people also, I've heard people like they'll break the pills open and try to put in their gums, or I've heard people that they had it in kind of this, I don't know if they described it being like a leafy pulp or something like that. I don't know, I've heard of all kinds of different things. So tea, I've only heard one of my clients reference it as a tea, and he said he didn't get anything from it. But again, like there's so much variety between person to person. Like you know, like I can't begin to tell you like the first time you met me, how dizzy I was that session. I don't know if it was obvious. I was on 1/4 dose of what the doctor wanted me to be on. And now I'm on 1/16 of that dose. And I still lose my train of thought, and I still feel heavy. And it's like I'm supposed to be on like 16 times higher dose than I am right now. Like, that's not happening, man. This is not happening. So I mean, there's room for people to be sensitive, like you and me, right? You know, it's not ideal. And I don't plan on staying on this med, by the way. It's like I'm just making a plan to transition to something else, to transition to something more permanent. I'm working with a scientist to develop something specific. It's a long story, but yeah.
So with kratom, have you seen in your practice like addiction to kratom, or do you feel like it's usually more used for good as like a replacement to something potentially worse?
So the research I read a few months ago said it absolutely can be addictive, it can be habit forming, and it can be risky, kind of like a benzo in a long-term kind of way. It's not going to be as habit forming as quickly or as aggressive as a benzo, but the fact that it works on GABA receptors is a big, like, those are always dangerous because the aggressive burning process can always be dangerous. It's seizure inducing to lose those receptor sites if you lose them too fast. But the answer to that is I don't know really. But there's room for concern, but I don't know. So, did I answer your question?
Just if you've seen it personally in your practice.
I've seen it, but the answer is yes. I've seen it in my practice. I haven't sussed out the role. I don't think it was causing the primary symptoms for my client. That's what I'll say. But whether it was contributing to the overall chaos in their system, that's not known. So yeah, I don't know. But I don't believe it was their primary problem. Whereas with alcohol or benzodiazepines, it is not uncommon for that med to be inducing their primary distress. It's not unusual at all. So you know, with kratom, like again, like it's like one of those things, like we want to orient ourselves well to it. It's not illegal yet. You know, it might be in the next year, or it might be regulated. So you guys have to decide how you want to think about it in your practice and talk to your supervisors about that. But yes, we'll see. We'll just have to see. Just follow the research. So yeah. Any last thoughts or questions? Yep. Antihistamines? No. I don't know, just joking. Well, we're good, you guys, so I'll let you go. You guys hung in there. We didn't even take a break. It's crazy. So thank you. You guys were great today. Let's go ahead and put a pause on this.